What happens when those people paid to serve you with a smile secretly despise you? We've all felt that flicker of disrespect, that condescending glance. But what if it wasn't just a flicker? What if it was a full-blown mockery right in your face? Today's story is about a woman who endured exactly that, laughed at by a flight crew for her accent, dismissed for the color of her skin. They thought she was just another passenger they could bully. They had no idea they were mocking the one person on Earth they should have been terrified to offend. This isn't just a story about bad service. It's about power, prejudice, and the kind of hard karma that changes lives forever. Stay tuned. The hum inside the first-class cabin of Stellara Airlines Flight 88, a flagship Airbus A380 on its 11-hour journey from London Heathrow to Los Angeles, was a carefully engineered symphony of tranquility. It was a sound that cost $12,000 to hear, a low thrum that promised champagne on tap duvets softer than clouds, and a seamless transition between continents. For most of its occupants, this was a familiar world, a bubble of privilege that insulated them from the mundane struggles of life. In seat 3A sat Dr. Nia Hayes. To the casual observer, she might have seemed slightly out of place, not because of her race, but because of her stillness. While other passengers were already making a show of their importance, loudly taking calls, demanding specific vintages of wine, or ostentatiously arranging their Louis Vuitton carry-ons, Nia was simply observing. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue pantsuit, its sharp tailoring hinting at a world of boardrooms, not beach vacations. Her hair was styled in intricate micro braids, pulled back into a sophisticated low bun. No flashy jewelry, just a classic timepiece on her wrist, and an air of quiet, penetrating intelligence in her dark eyes. This flight was more than a job. It was personal. She had built a career, a doctorate in organizational psychology, a reputation as a miracle worker in corporate culture, on the principle that dignity was not a luxury item. It was the core infrastructure of any successful enterprise. She remembered with a clarity that still stung, being a young graduate student on a budget airline, ignored by a flight attendant who sneered at her for asking for a simple cup of tea. She had felt powerless then, insignificant. That feeling had forged a resolve in her. One day, she would be in a position to ensure no one was ever made to feel that way under her watch. And now, as the global VP of in-flight experience, she was that person. She had spent the last 20 minutes listening, not to the engine, but to the crew. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Tiffany Jensen, was a caricature of seasoned professionalism. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a perfect chignon. Her smile was wide and bright, but it never quite reached her eyes. Her movements were sharp, efficient, and broadcast a weary tolerance for the pampered passengers she served. She had been with Stellara for 16 years, most of them on this lucrative LA-London route. She saw it not as a service role, but as a performance, and the first-class cabin was her personal stage. Her primary accomplice was a younger, smirking flight attendant named Mark Thorne. He was handsome, in a generic, forgettable way, and he moved with a cocky swagger that suggested he believed serving the rich somehow made him one of them. In the galley just before boarding, he'd been complaining to Tiffany about his car payment. 16 years, Tiff, he'd whined. You'd think we'd be able to afford a decent life, not just serve fancy wine to these clowns. Tiffany had patted his arm. Patience, darling. Think of it as a safari. We're just observing the animals in their unnatural habitat. This cynical worldview was the foundation of their partnership. Nia's turn for their attention came. Tiffany glided to her side, her smile tightening slightly as she took in Nia's appearance. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff, Mom?" Tiffany's voice was honey-laced but with a synthetic sweetness. Nia looked up from her tablet, her gaze steady. "Yes, thank you. May I please have a glass of still water with a slice of lime, and perhaps a look at the wine list for after we are airborne?" Her voice, a melodious blend of a Nigerian upbringing and a London education, was rich and precise. It was an accent that told a story of multiple continents, of a life lived across cultures. To the untrained or prejudiced ear, it was simply other. Tiffany's smile faltered for a nanosecond. She exchanged a lightning-quick glance with Mark, who was hovering nearby. It was a look so fleeting, so subtle, that 99% of passengers would have missed it. But Nia's job was to notice the 1%. Her entire career was built on observing the minute details that formed the bigger picture of human behavior. "Of course, Tiffany," said her tone, now a fraction more condescending. "Still water and the wine list." She drew out the words as if Nia had requested something impossibly complex. As she turned to leave, Nia watched her approach Mark near the galley. She couldn't hear their words, but she didn't need to. Tiffany leaned in, whispered something, and Mark's shoulders started to shake with silent, suppressed laughter. He covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes crinkling with mirth, as he looked directly at Nia. The message was as clear as if they had shouted it. "Did you hear her? Who does she think she is?" Nia felt a familiar cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was a feeling she had known her whole life, a toxic cocktail of anger, humiliation, and weary resignation. But her face remained a mask of serene neutrality. She turned her attention back to her tablet, her fingers tapping lightly on the screen. She was not just a passenger. She was a scientist, and this cabin was her laboratory. The subjects were unfortunately proving her hypothesis with alarming speed. The water arrived, delivered by Mark. He placed it down with a little too much force, causing a small amount to slop onto the polished wood grain of the console. "Oops, there you go," he said, not a hint of apology in his voice. He then leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a stage whisper. "You know that accent is wild. Where is that from?" I was guessing maybe Jamaica, but my girl Tiffany said somewhere in Africa. "You should do voiceovers for one of those Nollywood movies." He winked as if they were sharing a private joke. The insult was breathtaking in its audacity. It was a trifecta of prejudice, mocking her accent, reducing an entire continent to a single country, and topping it off with a reference designed to frame her as unsophisticated. Nia stared at him. She didn't blink. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to stand there in the wake of his own pathetic attempt at humor. His smirk began to fade, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Finally, she spoke, her voice even colder and more precise than before. "Please ensure my table is wiped clean, and inform your lead that I will be requiring a full bottle of the Chateau Margaux 2004 after takeoff. Not just a glass. Have her present it to me for inspection before opening. Is that clear?" The shift in her tone, the sheer unadulterated authority that radiated from her, threw him off completely. The mention of a $4,000 bottle of wine, a detail he hadn't expected from the woman he'd just stereotyped, scrambled his brain. The whole bottle," he stammered. "Is that a challenge to your comprehension or your inventory?" Nia asked, her eyebrow raising a single deliberate millimeter. Mark flushed a deep, ugly red. "No, ma'am, right away." He scurried off, his swagger gone, replaced by the flustered gait of a schoolboy who had just been dressed down by the headmistress. Nia watched him go, then took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. She opened a new file on her tablet. It was a secure, encrypted document. The title of the project was Project Altitude LAX LHR JFK Corridor Audit. Her name and title were at the top of the page. Dr. Nia Hayes, Global Vice President, In-Flight Experience and Operations, Stellara Airlines Corporate. She began to type. Her notes were meticulous, time-stamped to the second. 14:32 GMT. Initial interaction with lead FA Tiffany Jensen. Nonverbal cues indicate immediate bias-based judgment. Micro-expressions of contempt observed. 14:33 GMT. Interaction with FA Mark Thorne. Open mockery of accent. Unprofessional and offensive reference to Nollywood. Clear violation of Stellara's Code of Conduct, Section 4, Subsection B, Dignity and Respect. 14:35 GMT. Deliberate service, lapse, spillage, no apology. Insubordinate reaction to a standard, albeit premium service request. Suggests lack of training or willful disregard for premium cabin protocols. This was not a complaint. This was evidence. In the galley, Mark was recounting the incident to Tiffany, his voice a panicked whisper. "She wants the Margot, the whole bottle, and you should have seen the way she looked at me, Tiff. It was like she was staring right through me." Tiffany scoffed, waving a dismissive hand as she checked her lipstick in the reflection of a coffee pot. "Oh, relax. She's probably some government minister's wife from Nigeria spending oil money. They get a little taste of power, and they think they own the world. Just give her the expensive wine. It's not our money. But watch her. I bet she doesn't even know how to hold the glass properly." She paused, a malicious grin spreading across her face. "Actually, I have an idea. A little bit of in-flight entertainment." A younger flight attendant, Chloe Davis, who was quietly stocking juice cartons, looked up with a worried expression. Chloe was new, only 6 months with the airline, and she still believed in the glossy image Stellara sold to the world. She revered Tiffany, but was also terrified of her sharp tongue and cruel sense of humor. "What are you going to do?" Chloe asked timidly. Tiffany's eyes gleamed. "Don't you worry, sweetie. We're just going to make sure our special guest in 3A has a truly memorable flight, one she'll be talking about for a long, long time." As the massive jet finally began its powerful ascent, banking gracefully over the grey sprawl of London, Nia Hayes gazed out the window, a flicker of something hard and unyielding in her eyes. Tiffany Jensen was right about one thing. It was indeed going to be a memorable flight. But the person who would be remembered and the reasons why were about to take a turn. She could never, in her wildest, most arrogant dreams, have possibly imagined. The audit had begun. The seatbelt sign pinged off, signaling their arrival at cruising altitude, and for Tiffany and Mark, the start of the games. The presentation of the wine was the opening salvo. It was Tiffany who brought it, holding the bottle of Chateau Margaux, not with the reverence it deserved, but as if it were a novelty item. "Here we are," she announced, her voice pitched to carry to the surrounding seats. "One bottle of Chateau Margaux." She deliberately mispronounced it, a butcher's chop, to a name synonymous with elegance. The man in seat 2B, a portly executive named Mr. Henderson, chuckled into his glass of scotch. He was a willing audience. Nia didn't react to the mispronunciation. She simply extended her hand. "Thank you. I will inspect the cork before you pour." Tiffany's smirk was venomous. "Oh, of course. Have to make sure it's the real deal." She performed the opening with a flourish of exaggerated movements, presenting the cork to Nia on a silver tray. Nia picked it up, examined its length and markings, and rolled it slightly between her fingers to check for brittleness. It was a process she had learned from her father, a diplomat who believed a person's character could be judged by how they treated the three W's, wine waitstaff and women. This crew was failing on at least 2 counts. "It is satisfactory," Nia said, calmly placing the cork down. "You may pour a tasting sample." Tiffany poured a splash into the large Bordeaux glass, her movements just a little too jerky. As Nia swirled the deep ruby liquid, Mark reappeared. "Can I get you our menu, ma'am?" he asked, holding out the leather-bound folder. But as Nia reached for it, he pulled it back slightly. "Oh, careful now. Wouldn't want you to spill any of that expensive grape juice on it. It's a very sophisticated menu." He was parroting her earlier tone back at her, a petulant child's imitation. Chloe, trailing behind him with a breadbasket, looked mortified. Her eyes met Nia's for a brief second, and Nia saw a flash of apology, of helpless fear. It was a look Nia recognized well, the look of a bystander who knows something is wrong, but is too afraid of the primary aggressors to intervene. She made a mental note. F.A. Chloe Davis, aware of misconduct, non-participant, but complicit through inaction. Potential for corrective training. Nia tasted the wine. The vintage was sublime, a complex tapestry of dark fruit, cedar, and violets. It was a small, perfect moment of beauty in an otherwise ugly environment. "The wine is acceptable. You may leave the bottle," she said, dismissing them. For the next 2 hours, the slights continued. They were masters of plausible deniability. When Nia requested a blanket, Mark brought one that was thin and scratchy, not the plush duvets the other passengers received. When she asked for it to be changed, he sighed dramatically. "We seem to be all out of the premium ones. So sorry." Later, when she tried to use the in-flight entertainment system, her screen conveniently malfunctioned. Mark's solution was to restart it 3 times before shrugging. "Looks like it's busted. Guess you'll have to read a book or something." During the meal's service, her seared salmon arrived slightly overcooked, the skin not quite crisp. It was a minor thing, a detail most might not notice, but in a first-class cabin, precision was the entire point. She ate it without complaint, documenting everything on her tablet under the glow of her reading light. 16:45 GMT lead F.A. Tiffany Jensen intentionally mispronounces premium wine selection in a manner designed to elicit ridicule from other passengers. 16:47 GMT F. Mark Thorne employs passive-aggressive tactics with menu presentation, creates an atmosphere of hostility. 17:20 GMT substandard comfort amenities provided blanket. Claim of lack of inventory is dubious. Will cross-reference with flight supply logs upon landing. 17:55 GMT technical sabotage. In-flight entertainment system for seat 3A non-functional. F.A. Thorne makes no genuine attempt to resolve. 18:05 GMT meal service. Quality of main course salmon below specified standard for F-class. Possible deliberate mishandling in the galley. Mr. Henderson in 2B was becoming part of the problem. He clearly enjoyed the show, egging Tiffany on. "You run a tight ship, Tiffany," he boomed. "Not like some airlines, you have to keep standards up." His eyes flicked towards Nia. The subtext was clear. Some people don't belong here, and we're all in on the joke. Nia ignored him, focusing on her work. The project altitude audit wasn't just about rude flight attendants. It was a deep dive into a systemic issue Stellara's CEO David Sterling had become obsessed with. Customer satisfaction scores on their most profitable routes were plummeting despite millions being invested in new seats and better champagne. In her mind, she replayed her conversation with David in his sprawling London office. He had been pacing, agitated. "I'm bleeding premium customers to Emirates and Singapore. Nia," he'd said, his voice tight. "My grandfather founded this airline on the principle of impeccable service. Now I get letters complaining about an arrogance, a sourness in the crew. But the official reports are always clean. It's like there's a wall of silence. The rot is in the culture, David," she had explained. "When seniority is prized over service, you create fiefdoms. The complaint logs are just the tip of the iceberg. The people who are truly disrespected often don't complain. They just vanish. They take their money and their loyalty to an airline where they feel seen." David had stopped pacing and looked her square in the eye. "I know. That's why I need you. No one knows you yet. You're a ghost in the system. Go on this flight. Don't use your staff privileges. Book it like a civilian. I want to know what it's really like. I want the ground truth, no matter how ugly." And the ground truth, at 35,000 feet, was uglier than he could have imagined. This wasn't just bad service. It was a coordinated, targeted campaign of psychological harassment. The next phase of their entertainment involved noise. Tiffany and Mark began to hold loud, extended conversations in the galley, the sound carrying directly into the cabin. They were performing. They were mocking passengers from previous flights, putting on exaggerated, offensive accents. An Indian accent for a man who had complained about his curry, a flamboyant lisp for a man they deemed effeminate. And then came the one Nia was waiting for. Mark's voice, a clumsy, high-pitched parody. "Oh, please, may I have a glass of your stillest water? The water must be very, very still for me. And a bottle of your most expensive Margox." Tiffany's shriek of laughter was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, Mark, you are terrible. She's going to hear you." "Who cares?" he replied, his voice full of bravado. "What's she going to do? Write a strongly worded letter?" Nia's fingers never stopped moving across her tablet. 19 T crew members Jensen and Thorne engage in open mockery of passengers, including myself, within earshot of the cabin. A clear and egregious violation of professional ethics and Stellara's zero-tolerance policy on bullying and harassment. Code of Conduct, Section 5, Subsection A. F.A. Davis present, and visibly uncomfortable, yet remains silent. Passenger in seat 2B, Henderson acts as an encouraging audience, fostering a toxic environment. She put the tablet down and pressed the call button. It was Chloe who answered, her face pale. "Yes, ma'am, Chloe." Nia said, her voice soft but firm. "I am finding it difficult to concentrate with the level of noise coming from the galley. Could you please ask your colleagues to be more considerate?" Chloe looked as if she were about to burst into tears. "Yes, of course. I'm so sorry." She scurried back to the galley. The loud talking stopped, but it was replaced by something worse, an intense, angry whispering. A moment later, Tiffany strode out, her face a mask of fury. She marched directly to Nia's seat and leaned down, her smile gone, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. "We have a problem here," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "I believe I addressed the issue with your colleague," Nia replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You know, some people," Tiffany said, practically spitting the words, "come into a place where they don't belong, and they think a big credit card limit gives them the right to tell everyone what to do. You've been a problem since you stepped on this plane. We're all just trying to do our jobs, but you seem determined to make it difficult. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back of the plane." It was a direct threat, a lead flight attendant suggesting a first-class passenger be moved to economy was an unprecedented breach of protocol. It was the nuclear option, and Tiffany had just deployed it. Nia leaned back in her seat, a slow, cold smile finally touching her own lips for the first time. It was a smile that didn't convey humor. It conveyed finality. "Thank you, Tiffany," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You have just given me the final piece of data I required." Tiffany stared at her, utterly bewildered by this response. "What are you talking about, Data?" Before Nia could answer, a sudden violent jolt shook the entire aircraft. The cabin lights flickered, and a collective gasp went through the passengers. The plane dropped a sickening lurch that sent loose items flying. An alarm began to chime from the cockpit, a sound that cut through the engineered tranquility and spoke of real, immediate danger. In the aisle, Tiffany lost her balance, stumbling and falling hard against an empty seat. The captain's voice, tight with strain, crackled over the PA system. "Flight crew and passengers, return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately. We are experiencing unexpected and severe turbulence." Chaos erupted. But through it all, Nia Hayes remained perfectly unnervingly still, her eyes fixed on the panicked face of Tiffany Jensen. The audit was about to enter a new, unscheduled phase. The A380 shuddered again, a deep groaning tremor that felt like a giant hand shaking the aircraft. The elegant cabin became a scene of chaos. Wine glasses shattered, and a laptop went skittering across the aisle. Fear, raw and undisguised, swept through first class, stripping away the veneer of sophisticated detachment. Mr. Henderson was white-knuckling his armrests, his face ashen. A woman across the aisle was openly weeping. In that moment of crisis, training is supposed to take over. But Tiffany Jensen's training was buried under 16 years of accumulated arrogance. She scrambled up from the floor, her composure shattered. Her eyes were wide with panic, darting around the cabin without focus. "Everyone just stay calm," she yelled, her voice high and shrill, the exact opposite of the authoritative tone required. Mark emerged from the galley, looking just as terrified. "What was that? What's happening?" he asked Tiffany, his voice cracking. They looked at each other, not as a professional crew, but as two frightened people completely out of their depth. Nia watched them, her expression unreadable. She had unhooked her seatbelt and was moving with a fluid, purposeful grace that stood in stark contrast to the crew's panic. 2010 GMT Severe Turbulence Event. Initial crew response: Jensen Thorne is panicked and ineffective. Failure to demonstrate leadership or follow emergency protocols for passenger reassurance. Loss of situational awareness evident. Tiffany Nia's voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it had a diamond-hard edge of command that made both Tiffany and Mark turn to look at her. "Stop shouting. You're making it worse. Your first priority is to secure the galley. Your second is to do a visual check of every passenger starting from the front." "Move." Tiffany stared at her dumbfounded. "Who do you think you are telling me? I am the person telling you to do the job you are paid for." Nia snapped, her patience finally gone. "There is a service cart unsecured in the galley. If we hit another downdraft, it becomes a 200-pound missile. Now go." The sheer force of her personality, the undeniable logic of her command, seemed to wake Chloe from her fear-induced paralysis. "She's right, Tiff. The cart." Chloe immediately ran towards the galley, her training kicking in. Mark, jolted by Chloe's action, followed her. That left Tiffany alone in the aisle, being stared down by the passenger she had spent the last 6 hours tormenting. Humiliation and fear warred on her face. Gritting her teeth, she turned and began moving through the cabin, her earlier grace replaced by clumsy, jerky movements as she checked on passengers. Nia, meanwhile, had noticed something else. During the jolt, a passenger in seat 5D, an elderly man who had been sleeping, had been thrown forward violently against the seat in front of him. He was now slumped over, unnaturally still. Nia was at his side in an instant. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked gently, touching his shoulder. There was no response. She pressed 2 fingers to his carotid artery. His pulse was thready and dangerously fast. His breathing was shallow. "I need the medical kit." Now Nia called out, her voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. Tiffany, who had just finished her clumsy cabin check, came over. "We can't. Passenger medical emergencies have to be called in to Medlink. That's the rule." "He doesn't have time for you to make a phone call," Nia said, already carefully maneuvering the man back into his seat. His face was pale and clammy. "He's showing signs of shock, possibly an internal injury. Where is the defibrillator and the onboard medical kit?" Her knowledge was too specific, her actions too confident. She wasn't guessing. She was assessing. Tiffany, completely overwhelmed, just pointed dumbly towards a storage compartment. Nia opened it and pulled out the large red case. She didn't hesitate unzipping it and pulling out a blood pressure cuff and a pulse oximeter as she strapped the cuff to the man's arm. Chloe arrived, her face a mixture of fear and awe. "Can I help?" Chloe asked. "Yes," Nia said, without looking up. "Find his travel companion. Check his documents for any medical history, and get me the purser. I need him to inform the captain we have a critical medical emergency in first class. We may need to divert." Chloe nodded and sprang into action, a sense of purpose, replacing her fear. She was finally following a real leader. Tiffany just stood there, useless. This was her cabin, her flight, her responsibility. Yet here was this passenger, this woman she had dismissed and mocked, commanding the scene with a level of competence that Tiffany couldn't even begin to fathom. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. As Nia worked, she spoke to the unconscious man in a calm, soothing tone, the rich cadence of her accent now a sound of pure reassurance. She found a medical alert bracelet on his wrist. Diabetes type 1. Pacemaker. "Okay," Nia murmured to herself. "That changes things." She located the man's insulin pen in his carry-on. She checked his blood sugar with the glucometer from the kit. It was dangerously low, hypoglycemia exacerbated by the shock of the turbulence. She administered a small, careful dose of glucagon from the emergency kit, a procedure requiring precision. Within minutes, a flicker of consciousness returned to the man's eyes. He moaned softly. By the time the purser, a harried-looking man named George, arrived, the immediate crisis had been averted. The turbulence had subsided, and the elderly man was conscious, sipping water that Chloe was holding for him. George looked at the scene, Nia kneeling in the aisle, medical equipment laid out neatly beside her, and his 2 lead first-class attendants looking utterly lost. "What happened here?" he asked, directing the question to Tiffany. Tiffany stammered, "There was turbulence. The passenger, she took over." Nia stood up, her knees cracking softly. She looked George in the eye. "The passenger's name is Mr. Carlyle. He had a severe hypoglycemic event. He is stable for now, but he needs to be monitored for the rest of the flight. Your crew was not equipped to handle the situation." Her gaze flickered to Tiffany and Mark. They were, in fact, a liability. The accusation hung in the air, cold and heavy. "I had it under control," Tiffany protested weakly, color flooding her cheeks. No, Nia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You did not. You were panicked, and you froze. At the moment when these passengers needed professional leadership, you and Mr. Thorne provided only fear and confusion. Your junior attendant, Chloe, was the only one who responded effectively to direct commands. She turned back to the purser. George, I want a full incident report filed. I want the flight logs, the maintenance report on the turbulence warning system, and the supply manifests for this cabin. I want them ready for me when we land. George stared at her, his brow furrowed. I'm sorry, but who are you to demand? Nia held up her hand, silencing him. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a slim, black business card case. She extracted a single card and handed it to him. George took it, glanced at it, and then his eyes widened in disbelief. He looked back up at Nia, his expression changing from confusion to one of dawning horror. He read the card again, as if to be sure. Dr. Nia Hayes, Global VP, In-Flight Experience and Operations, Stellara Airlines Corporate Headquarters. His face went pale. Dr. Hayes, he breathed, his voice barely audible. I had no idea. You're on the executive roster. Tiffany and Mark, standing close enough to hear, felt a wave of cold dread wash over them. It was a physical sensation, a chilling premonition of absolute doom. Mark looked like he was going to be physically sick. Tiffany's face, which had been red with anger, was now a ghostly white. The mockery, the spilt water, the cheap blanket, the Margox, the Nollywood comment, the threat to move her to economy. Every single act of petty cruelty from the past 7 hours flashed through her mind, each one a nail in the coffin of her career. Nia retrieved her card from George's stunned fingers. No, George, she said, her voice glacially calm. You didn't know. And that is the entire point of this audit. You and I will have a long talk before we deplane. As for your lead attendants, she turned her head, slowly pinning Tiffany and Mark with a gaze that promised a reckoning. They have a meeting at LAX. A meeting they are not prepared for. She walked back to seat 3A, leaving a trail of silent, abject terror in her wake. She sat down, fastened her seatbelt, and picked up her tablet. Her fingers began to fly across the screen. The evidence phase was over. The judgment phase was about to begin. The last 3 hours of Flight 88 were the quietest, most tense hours of Tiffany Jensen's life. The air in the first-class cabin crackled with unspoken dread. Every ping of the call bell made her jump. Every glance from a passenger felt like an accusation. She and Mark moved like automatons, their earlier swagger replaced by the shuffling gait of the condemned. They avoided eye contact with Nia, but they could feel her presence, a silent, powerful gravity in seat 3A. They were no longer flight attendants, they were lab rats, and the experiment was over. Chloe, on the other hand, worked with a newfound diligence. She approached Nia's seat quietly. Dr. Hayes, may I get you anything? More water, a fresh hot towel. Her voice was respectful, her service now impeccable. Nia simply nodded. Thank you, Chloe. A hot towel would be appreciated. It was a small gesture, but in the thick atmosphere of dread, it felt like a lifeline for Chloe. Nia, for her part, ignored Tiffany and Mark completely. Her focus was on her report. She typed relentlessly, her face illuminated by the cool blue light of the screen. She was no longer just documenting incidents, she was building a case. She cross-referenced their actions with specific sections of the Stellara Employee Handbook, FAA regulations, and International Aviation Service standards. It was a clinical, devastating deconstruction of their professional conduct. An hour before landing, she connected to the plane's satellite Wi-Fi, using a corporate access code that bypassed the passenger payment portal. She composed a short, precise email. To David Sterling, CEO, Robert Miller, Head of HR, Maria Flores, LAX Station Manager, Subject Urgent, Felt 88, LHR, LAX, Arrival, Project Altitude Findings. All preliminary findings from the Project Altitude Audit on Flight 88 are alarming and require immediate action upon landing. I have documented multiple severe breaches of conduct by lead FA Tiffany Jensen and FAE Mark Thorne, including but not limited to targeted harassment of a passenger, gross negligence during a mid-air emergency, and fostering a toxic and unsafe cabin environment. Maria, I need you and Robert Miller to meet me at the gate. No exceptions. Await my signal before boarding. I will handle the initial deplaning of the crew. David, the rot is worse than we thought. Full report to follow. Regards, Dr. Nia Hayes, Global VP, In-Flight Experience and Operations. She hit send. Across the Atlantic in Los Angeles, 3 phones buzzed, setting into motion a chain of events that would seal the crew's fate. As the plane began its final descent, the familiar Californian landscape sprawling below Tiffany made one last, desperate attempt. She approached Nia's seat, her face a pathetic mask of contrition. Dr. Hayes, she began, her voice trembling. I want to apologize. I had no idea who you were. Our behavior was completely unprofessional. It was a joke. It went too far. It was out of character. I've been under a lot of stress. Nia looked up from her screen, her eyes devoid of any emotion. A joke, she repeated, her voice soft. You thought mocking my accent was a joke. You thought denying me the same standard of service as the passenger next to me was a joke. You thought threatening to remove me from a cabin I paid $12,000 to be in was a joke. You call it out of character, Ms. Jensen. But I suspect this is exactly your character when you believe there are no consequences. She paused, leaning forward slightly. Let me be clear. Your behavior wasn't unprofessional. It was inhumane. And you didn't do it because you thought I was a regular passenger. You did it because you thought I was a black woman who didn't belong in your world. The only difference between me and any other person you might have treated this way is that I have the power to hold you accountable. You aren't sorry for what you did. You are only sorry you got caught. Tiffany opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. There was nothing to say. Nia had dissected her motives with the precision of a surgeon. She simply stood there shaking before turning and retreating to the galley for the last time. The plane touched down at LAX with a gentle bump, a smooth landing that belied the storm that was about to break. As it taxied to the gate, the purser George approached Nia. Dr. Hayes, he said quietly, handing her a data stick. The logs you requested. Thank you, George, she said. Your full cooperation has been noted. When the jet bridge connected, the fasten seatbelt sign went off. Tiffany and Mark stood near the exit, their faces pale. Their plan was likely to bolt, to disappear into the terminal and try to figure out what to do next. Nia stood up and walked to the front of the cabin. She addressed the purser. George, please hold all other passengers for a moment. The first-class cabin crew will deplane first. All of them. It was a highly unusual order, and it sent a ripple of confusion through the cabin. Mr. Henderson looked on his face, a mask of dawning comprehension and shame. Nia stood at the door as Tiffany, Mark, and a terrified-looking Chloe stepped out onto the jet bridge. She followed them into the brightly lit corridor. Waiting there was not the usual smattering of ground staff. It was a reception committee. At the front stood Maria Flores, the LAX station manager, a formidable woman with a no-nonsense reputation. Beside her was Robert Miller, the head of West Coast Human Resources, a stern-looking man in a suit. Two airport security officers stood discreetly in the background. Maria's eyes met Nia's. "Dr. Hayes, welcome to Los Angeles. We received your message." Her gaze then shifted to the three flight attendants, and her expression hardened into granite. "Tiffany Jensen, Mark Thorne, Chloe Davis," Maria said, her voice sharp and official. "Please come with me. Your flight duties are concluded." The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Tiffany. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This wasn't a meeting next week. This was happening now. "Wait, what is this?" she blurted out. "You can't just... We have procedures. You are no longer in a position to lecture anyone on procedure." Nia's voice cut in cold as steel. She had stepped forward to stand beside Maria. "As of this moment, you and Mr. Thorne are suspended pending a full investigation which I will personally oversee. You will surrender your company IDs and credentials. You will be escorted from the airport premises. You are not to contact any other Stellara employees." "Is that understood?" Mark looked as if he was about to faint. He leaned against the wall of the jet bridge, his face clammy. Tiffany, however, still had some fight left in her. A cornered animal's last desperate snarl. "You can't do this. I have a union. I have 16 years with this company." 16 years. Robert Miller, the HR head, spoke for the first time, his voice dry as dust. "Ms. Jensen, your union representative has already been contacted and provided with a preliminary summary of the incident report. They are awaiting your call. Frankly, after reviewing Dr. Hayes' initial notes, including your threat to remove a first-class passenger from her ticketed cabin and your conduct during a medical emergency, I'd say 16 years is the least of your concerns. You're facing potential civil liabilities." The word liabilities broke Tiffany. Her rage collapsed into despair. The fight drained from her eyes, replaced by a vast, empty horror. Nia then turned her gaze to Chloe, who was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Chloe Davis," Nia said, her tone softening slightly but still firm. "My report will note that while you were complicit in your silence, you demonstrated a willingness to follow correct procedure when under duress and showed genuine remorse. Your case will be handled differently. You will be placed on administrative leave, and you will be required to attend a mandatory retraining program focused on ethics intervention and professional conduct. Whether you have a future with this airline will depend entirely on you." Chloe could only nod, sobbing, with a mixture of terror and a sliver of relief. Nia turned her attention back to the two main culprits. "Maria, please proceed." The HR rep stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne, Ms. Jensen, your IDs, please." Defeated, their faces a mixture of shock and utter despair, they handed over their badges, the plastic cards that had given them access to a world they felt superior to. Now, they were just symbols of everything they had just lost. As the security officers stepped forward to escort them away, Mark finally broke. "I'm sorry," he whispered, looking at Nia. "I am so sorry." Nia looked at him not with anger, but with a kind of weary disappointment. "You should be, but not to me. You should be sorry to every passenger you've ever judged, every person you've ever made to feel small. You had a position of trust, and you used to bully people. That is a profound failure, not just as an employee, but as a human being." She watched them being led away down a service corridor, disappearing from view. They weren't just losing their jobs, Their entire world, built on a fragile sense of superiority, had been dismantled in front of them. The karma was not just hard, it was absolute. Nia turned back to the plane where Mr. Henderson from 2B was standing at the door. He shuffled his feet, unable to meet her gaze. "Dr. Hayes," he mumbled, I was out of line. No excuse." Nia just looked at him. "No, Mr. Henderson," she said quietly. "There wasn't." She left him standing there, stewing in his shame, and walked back into the aircraft to address the remaining passengers. Her work on Flight 88 was done, but her work for Stellara was just beginning. 3 months later, the Stellara boardroom, usually a place of tense, clipped conversations, was filled with a sense of cautious optimism. David Sterling stood before a large screen, tapping a graph that showed a steep, upward trajectory. The air of agitation he'd worn for months had been replaced by a deep, weary relief. A 17% increase in positive customer feedback on the transatlantic corridor, he said, his voice carrying a note of genuine awe as he looked at Nia, and a 60% drop in official complaints. 17%, Nia. In 1 quarter. It's unprecedented. Nia Hayes, seated at the head of the long polished table, allowed herself a small, genuine smile. It's amazing what happens when your employees feel valued and your customers feel respected, isn't it, David? We didn't just change the rules, we reminded people of the mission. Project Altitude had become the blueprint for a company-wide revolution. The new training program, designed by Nia, was its centerpiece. Its lead trainer was a surprise to many, a newly promoted and confident Chloe Davis. In sessions, she stood before new recruits, not as a perfect example, but as a flawed one. With a steady voice, she would recount her own inaction on Flight 88. "I knew what was happening was wrong," she'd tell them. "I was afraid of losing my job, so I stayed quiet. But I learned that day that by trying not to lose my job, I almost lost my integrity. Your silence is a choice. Make it a brave one." Her testimony, raw and honest, was more effective than any corporate manual. The fates of her former colleagues served as a more brutal cautionary tale, whispered in crew lounges from JFK to Heathrow. Mark Thorne, blacklisted from all major airlines, was last seen working at a rental car kiosk at Burbank Airport. The cocky swagger was gone, replaced by a perpetual slump. Sometimes a sleek, black town car would pull up, and he'd see a family with a familiar, melodic accent step out, laughing and happy. In those moments, he would look away, a flush of hot shame rising in his neck, the ghost of his own smug laughter haunting him. Tiffany Jensen's fall was harder, deeper. After a bitter but brief fight, she was terminated for cause, the union quietly backing away when faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence in Nia's report. With her specialized career in ashes, she found work as a shift manager at a 24-hour diner off the I-5, a world of sticky menus and the perpetual smell of stale coffee. One rainy Tuesday night, a family came in tired from a long drive, their colorful clothes a bright spot in the dreary diner. The mother, speaking with a gentle, lyrical West African accent, asked Tiffany for an extra set of napkins for her children. For a dizzying, heart-stopping moment, the fluorescent lights of the diner bled into the soft cabin lighting of an A380. Tiffany didn't just see a customer. She saw Nia Hayes in her place, heard that same precise, cultured tone. She flinched her hand, physically recoiling from the napkin dispenser. A wave of nausea and fury at the woman, at the world, but mostly at herself, crashed over her. She shoved the napkins onto the counter, muttered a curt, "You're welcome," and fled to the stockroom in the back. Leaning against a stack of canned peaches, She choked back a dry sob, the ghost of her own arrogance mocking her in the suffocating darkness. The karma wasn't a single lightning strike. It was this, a slow, grinding daily erosion of the life she had so carelessly believed she deserved. A week after the flight, a handwritten letter on heavy cream-colored corporate letterhead had arrived at Nia's office. It was from Mr. Henderson. It contained no excuses, only a profound, unsparing apology for his behavior and for being a willing audience to cruelty. He informed her that his company had made a substantial donation in her name to her chosen charity, a scholarship fund for young African women seeking careers in aviation. Nia pinned the notice to the corkboard in her office next to a photo of her late father. She looked at it for a long moment. Some people like Tiffany were a lesson in consequences, but others like Chloe and even Mr. Henderson were a reminder that people could learn, that cultures could change, that rot could be cut out to allow for new growth. And for her, that was a victory almost as sweet and far more lasting than justice itself. And that's how a routine flight became a masterclass in accountability. Tiffany and Mark were terminated their long careers, ending not with a quiet retirement, but with a humiliating escort out of the airport. The report filed by Dr. Nia Hayes, backed by her meticulous notes, and the flight's own black box data was so damning that any attempt at an appeal was futile. But the story doesn't end there. Her audit, Project Altitude, sparked a revolution at Stellara Airlines. It led to a complete overhaul of their customer service training, a new zero-tolerance policy on discrimination that was actually enforced, and a system of anonymous undercover audits on all major routes. Nia Hayes didn't just get justice for herself, she made sure that no passenger would have to endure what she did. This story is a powerful reminder that the person you look down on today might just be the person who holds your entire future in their hands tomorrow. What do you think? Was the karma deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice served at 35,000 feet, make sure to hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more true life drama.